Welcome to the Nelson webinar for chemistry. So we're going to be looking at some strategies for implementing the new syllabus in Year 11 next year and then moving on to Year 12 in 2026. Okay, so here's a quick overview of the suite of Nelson texts that are going to be available. So biology, chemistry and physics. The Unit 1 and 2 texts will be available for the start for 2025, and the Year 12 text will be available shortly thereafter. Okay, so here's a look over the Nelson QCE Chemistry units for Units 1 and 2. So in today's session, we're going to look at what updates to the syllabus have been made, how to write some data tests, because I know all the teachers at the moment will be writing IA1s, and how the Nelson textbook supports students and teachers moving forward. So a little about me. My name's Rachel Bond. I've had over 20 years of teaching experience. At the moment, I'm a head of science at Catholic College in Queensland. I've presented at Canasta a few years ago in Darwin. I've led some communities in practice in chemistry, and basically I've been involved in teaching and assessing chemistry for many years, and that also involves teaching through many Queensland syllabus iterations. So that's why I've been speaking to you today about chemistry. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the syllabus updates and a quick summary of the changes that QCEE has made. So in topic 1, you can see that removed some orbital diagrams to represent the character and energy of orbitals, but they've also added some verbs. So instead of saying understand, they've actually moved that to explain. There's also a little reordering of content in between, and there's some new she's that have been added. In topic 2, again, being a little bit more specific with the verbs, which I think we all can agree is a great move. So they've gone from understand the hydrocarbons to explain. There's a little more detail about the types of bonding, so ionic, covalent and metallic. And again, there's some new science as a human endeavour topics in there as well. And then in fuels, in Unit 1, they're more prescriptive about the types of reactions that a balanced equation needs to be written for, and also added are some enthalpy diagrams and limitations of bond enthalpies in this section, and also analysing some data from different reaction types to find unknowns, and included yields and also some new science as a human endeavour topics as well. In Unit 3, in topic 1, they've removed analysing experimental data for strengths of acids, but they've also updated and the verbs, so they've removed appreciate and they've included explain, which is a lot more specific to the kinds of cognitions that the students need. Also added effect of temperature and equilibrium, reaction quotient calculations, KSP, using KC and QC to infer shifts and find unknowns, pKa, pKb, Kw, and endpoint for acid-base reactions. So just definitely being a lot more specific in that Unit 3, and also some updated science as a human endeavour topics. And then in topic 2 within Unit 3, again, removing some verbs that were difficult to decide what students actually needed to do, and change that to the verb explain. And then in this topic, in topic 2 as well, the students need to analyse data for redox reactions. They have to compare galvanic and electrolytic cells, describe the standard hydrogen electrodes half cells, look at electrode potential definitions and the limitations regarding that, looking at the factors affecting the products within electrolysis, and actually applying Faraday's law to find unknowns. So Faraday's is finally getting a look in the syllabus, as well as adding some new science as a human endeavour and some pracs that are new to the course as well. Unit 4, they've removed the lipids and triglycerides, and they've removed the nitriles from the list of functional groups. Updated, there's mention of organic pathways, but it's not limited to the pathway diagram provided, so we do have to be aware of that. It's more stripped back to the understanding of carbohydrates and proteins, so simplifying that, and enzymes have actually been moved to science as a human endeavour. So what have they added? They've added structures of organic substances, including functional groups. Chirality is added, optical isomers, analyzing data to determine physical properties and trends. Markovnikov's rule is specifically in there, and there's also some science as a human endeavour topics which are updated as well. In topic 2, they've removed fuels and molecular manufacturing, and updated, they've actually moved green chemistry to a science as a human endeavour topic, and again improved the verbs so that the cognitions are rather clear. So instead of understand, students need to explain. They've also added some analysing data to determine the impact of reagents of yield and rate, and some new science as a human endeavour topics to keep things interesting as well. Okay, so what do these changes mean for us? Well, as teachers, we need to plan new teaching and learning programs to reflect these changes in the syllabus. And also, of course, along with that is the writing of new assessment items. So that's a big topic that will be coming up for all of us in the next few months and years. Okay, so something that is quite pertinent to teachers right now is data tests. So with endorsement happening in the next couple of weeks, how do we write data tests, or how do we think about data tests, and what kind of skills do students need? So what are data tests? Well, data tests are internal assessments designed to test the application of skills to data. They're worth 10% of the Unit 3-4 result. Teachers are currently writing data tests for the last rotation of Year 12s on the older syllabus. So the data test that you'll be writing right now is for the older syllabus, ready to be used in 2025. And from thereafter, any data test that you write will actually reflect the new syllabus. So Year 11s, however, next year, if you choose to reflect what happens in Year 12 in Year 11, you'll need to be writing data tests to the new 2025 syllabus going forward. And this is where the Nelson text can help you along the way. So Nelson QCE Chemistry, it contains lots of practical activities and also data test style questions for every chapter. The cognitions of the questions in the text reflect the data test cognitions specified in the syllabus. So when you see some questions regarding data in the text, you can be assured that it is the kind of skill that students will actually need in their assessment pieces. The questions that are written in the text can be used as practice questions, or you can also use them as guidance for the kinds of questions that you could ask in your data test that you write. Okay, so how can we write an effective data test? Well, first off, I think a great way to start is to look at the QCEE subject reports. Okay, so what practices need to be strengthened? Think about your own practice. What is it that you could improve upon first? And then once you've done that, have a think about what is it that you would have had time to teach before you've set your data test date. So once you've figured out that, find some appropriate data sets to suit. Now, when you're choosing the data sets, it is really important that you choose something that the students are familiar with. So it should be a data set that's similar to a prac that you've done with students or some data analysis that you've already done with students. It shouldn't be something that students have never seen before in their life. So once you've chosen some data sets, I generally set 3 data sets per data test, but I will choose around 5 data sets to begin with, and then I'll brainstorm a whole range of questions. So I'll have each data set on a different document, and then I look at the cognitions that are required for the data test, and I will just sit and write a whole range of questions using those cognitions. So I will end up with a data set and a whole range of questions underneath. And once I've done that, I can then go through and choose what data set I think fits the best and what questions fit the best, and pop that into my IA1. And so because I've brainstormed my questions already, then I can just choose the appropriate balance of questions, and I'm not scratching around trying to figure out at that point what other questions I can write. So that's how I like to do it. I know that there's multiple ways of actually writing the IA1, but I choose to do it that way because then it gives me just a chance to sit back, think, brainstorm questions, and then just choose and be quite selective then, so I can get my 30, 40% balance of questions. And then, of course, once you've actually chosen your balance of questions, it's really important to write your answer scheme to check that the marks that you've allocated actually suit the questions that you've chosen. So, as I've said, finding appropriate data sets is really important. They must be based on practical activities or some simulations that students have done in class. And as I've said before, it's really important that you have time in your teaching plan prior to the data test to make sure that you've covered the relevant content and skills, so it is something that's familiar to students. Now, in the Nelson textbook, sample data sets and sample questions have been provided for each and every chapter. So you will see that every single chapter in the book will have a data set and questions with appropriate cognitions. So hopefully that will be of assistance to you going forward writing those data tests. Okay, so here's an example of a type of data set that you could use. So here's a graph of it's a titration curve, strong acid versus strong base. And when you're brainstorming, here's some examples of some cognitions that you could use. So you could use the word identify. And what do we need to identify? We could identify pH at equivalence point. We could identify pH at half equivalence. There's a few things that we could choose. Calculate, so obviously with a titration, we can calculate an unknown concentration based on a titration graph. Analyzing evidence, we could classify this curve as strong or weak. We could distinguish, what's different from equivalence or half equivalence, or even if you found yourself a graph that has a strong acid, strong base curve and a weak acid, strong base curve on the same graph, you could actually distinguish one graph from another in terms of the shape. And then interpret evidence, we could deduce the type of indicator that is used in the titration based on the data in the formula and data booklet. So I would then, once I've figured out these cognitions, I would then just brainstorm them underneath where I've got my graph and just write a bunch of questions that I could possibly use. So then when I'm writing my test, I could actually choose the questions that are most appropriate. When you're writing data tests, it's really important to use appropriate cognitions. So cognitions should be chosen from the table of cognitions in the syllabus that specifically discusses the data tests. Okay, so there is a section in the syllabus that says assessment, data test, and it has a table there that's very helpful in allowing you to choose that. But it's also important when you're choosing that cognition that you make sure that you maintain the intention of the cognition and that it matches the expected response. So something that's really handy to do as well is to just check the definitions of that cognition in the glossary to make sure that what you're asking the students to do actually matches what the intention of that cognition is. Okay, so when you're brainstorming questions, just write a range of questions, just sit back, grab those cognitions and write as many as you can. And remember, those cognitions are listed under three different objectives: apply understanding, analyze evidence, and interpret evidence. So when you're writing your data test, you need to maintain approximately a 30%, 30%, 40% split of marks between those three objectives. So look at the different cognitions and just make sure you've got a range of cognitions under the three different objectives so that when you're trying to get your 30, 30, 40 split later on, that you're able to make the choice there. All right, so as I've said, then once you've brainstormed, then just select the questions that match the data sets from your brainstormed list. And like I've said before, maintain the 30%, 30%, 40% split of marks. So 30% of marks should come from apply understanding, 30% from analyze evidence, and 30% from interpret evidence. So once you've done that and you're happy with how everything looks, write your marking scheme and just check your mark allocations and check that the answer that you write matches the intention of that cognition in the first place. That's really important. So how is Nelson QCE Units 1 and 2 Chemistry textbooks, how are they supporting students and teachers? So here's a look of the covers. So we've got QCE Chemistry 1 and 2 and QCE Chemistry Units 3 and 4 coming out. So in the textbooks, they make connections. They show how topics relate to each other in theory and in questions. So as we know, QCEE likes to bring in topics from one section to another in that external exam. So in the textbook, we've actually added some cross-chapter questions that require students to not just answer questions based on the content within that particular chapter, but also think back to what they've already learned and make those connections across chapters. And that strengthens their learning as well by making those connections. Also, it highlights key foundational knowledge related to chapter content. So every chapter will have a list of assumed knowledge that students should have before they begin the chapter. So they will finish the previous chapter, come into the next chapter, and that list of assumed knowledge will be there. And so they can look through and go, oh yes, I can do all those things. I'm now ready to learn this new information and link it to what I already know. In exam practice, at the end of every chapter are exam style questions. There's a range of multiple choice questions. There's short response questions at the end of every chapter to give students plenty of practice for their exams. There's also modified current exam questions for further practice. So you can do that. So in skills practice, there's data analysis questions in every chapter, helping students to practice their data analysis skills, which is required for our data tests, but also our external exams. And there's lots of pracs detailed in the textbook to consolidate those inquiry skills that students need. Additional teacher support within the textbooks include there's risk assessments, There's a teacher planner that you can use. We have chapter PowerPoints, unit exams at the end of chapters, and there's also a bank of questions that you can use to develop your own formative assessments. So there's lots of handy bits and pieces that are additional to the text to help teachers do their job effectively. And there's plenty more to come. So thank you very much. To learn about QCE Chemistry Units 1 and 2, please contact your Queensland Learning Consultants, Amanda Cunnington and David Truman, at the addresses and phone numbers below. Thank you for attending this presentation, and I hope you found all of these resources useful and that you're looking forward to using our Nelson textbooks for Units 1 and 2. Good luck with everybody, with the planning, everybody.